beautiful souls. I hope you're all having a wonderful day or evening, whenever and wherever when you decide to watch this. I wanted to come on here to talk about a huge planetary shift that we are moving through as a collective today, Tuesday, November 19th, 2024. So today marks the day where Pluto officially leaves Capricorn to enter into Aquarius, where it will stay for the next 20 years. And I debated coming on here because for me personally, Pluto transiting Capricorn has been very difficult for me personally. And as this chapter finally closes, it brings up a lot of emotions. So I wanted to take the time today to talk about the impact this transit has had on us as a collective, and focusing more so on those of us that have strong Capricorn placements in our birth chart, because these are the souls that will have felt Pluto's transformational energy the most over the past 16 years. Now, I've touched on this a little bit in a few posts here and there, but for me personally, Capricorn's transit began when I was still in high school. And it's interesting because as I took the time to reflect on this, there's a marked shift that occurs between grade 10 to grade 11, which is where I was in high school at the time Pluto entered Capricorn. And the marked shift was an energy of seriousness coming through. That shift from grade 10 to grade 11. Grade 11, we become more serious. We start to focus in on our career path and furthering our education for some of us, and really visualizing what our next steps are going to be after high school. So for me, as I said, as I reflected upon this, there was a net shift and different energy I entered into. Things got more serious. It was time to apply to universities to figure out, okay, what career path do I want to undertake? And I remember during that time in high school, it was really interesting. It was a random evening. My parents were having a party, and one of the guests said, "You're good at debating and arguing. Have you thought of becoming a lawyer?" And I gave it some thought, and I'm like, okay. It has potential as a career path. So fortunately enough for me, my high school offered law classes. So I got to experience a little bit of the legal profession and what it would look like while I was in high school. And at the time, it felt like my calling. I absolutely loved every minute of it, and continued on in grade 12, took law again, and finally I graduated high school in 2010. The next chapter was to figure out, okay, what undergrad degree would serve me the most as a lawyer? And people said political science. So again, I took other people's advice and pursued political science. I completed my degree in in 2014, and shortly thereafter I was set to begin law school. But the summer of 2014 was a pivotal point for me. I got a severe brain injury. I got a concussion, and that completely shifted my life. So I developed what's called post-concussion syndrome, and that's when the symptoms of a concussion last indefinitely. They don't know why. They're just like, So I began law school with a brain injury, and I remember pushing myself through it in my first year. I allowed myself to be in immense pain to perform. I went to every class with pain in my head, with light sensitivity. And I pushed on anyways, because I felt I had to. And also knowing that growing up I had a strange relationship with pain. I also played competitive soccer at the time. I kept getting injured. Yet I was encouraged again to push through the pain. So it didn't matter if I had something that was torn, you would just put this cooling rub and pretend the pain wasn't there, or push through it and play anyways. So you could say I was deeply conditioned to push through it. I wouldn't say ignore it, because it was very, very present, but to push through it anyways, to perform. So this conditioning stayed with me during my first year of law school, and it nearly killed me because of the amount of pain. So after I completed my first year, I decided to take a year off, because I'm like, this is ridiculous. I'm not doing that to myself ever again. So I took a year off, and then during that time period, I went through another depression. And I say another because I went through a severe depression when I was 21. So you can say that these challenges with pain and even mental health had been kind of following me for a while. And I didn't actually have the proper tools at the time on how to navigate these aspects. And so I navigated them to the best of my ability. But around the same time as my head injury the year before, I got introduced to mindfulness. So there had always kind of been a very, very, very subtle thread of spirituality in my life. I had a high interest in astrology as a teenager, seeking to understand. I had a bunch of astrology books then too. And it's really this year where I slowed things down that I became more introspective, more mindful. I started to practice meditation, and I really dived into spirituality first and foremost. And it's these tools that allowed me to empower myself and to move forward with more strength and more conviction. It also opened me up to the spiritual realm a lot more during that time. But I still had the belief that law was my path. And so after a sabbatical, I went back part-time and eventually completed my studies. And it's interesting that around the same time period, there was a shortage of placement for articling students. Now, for those of you that don't know, in order to become a lawyer, you go to law school, and then you need to do what's called articling, which is a form of internship, if you will, in a law firm. So there was a shortage of articling positions. So Ontario came up with the law practice program. And it was being offered in French at the University of Ottawa, where I had done my undergrad and my law school. So I decided to do that, and I loved my experience. I loved my experience because of the versatility. I got to see multiple eras of law in the span of 4 months. Yes, it was intense. Yes, it was very stressful. And yes, at the time, I was still doing this with concussion symptoms. So, needless to say, I remember before doing the law practice program in 2018, I felt this energy surge through that there was going to be a huge shift for me. I knew that it was going to have to do with either pursuing law or pursuing business. So I had this feeling, yet I continued on my path anyways. So I completed the law practice program. I did an internship at the government, which was not compatible with my character or personality, and eventually got called to the Ontario Bar in 2020. And it's really interesting because as I looked on the specific date when I was called to the bar, it was May 28th, 2020. And I found it interesting that it was a number 10 because 2 plus 8 gives us a 10. So it was the cycle completing, but then also a new beginning being integrated. And it was also around that time that I celebrated with my family being called to the bar. And I had a breakdown that very day because I realized I had no clue who the fuck I was. And I still to this day remember the look on my parents' face. It was one of sheer horror at what I was saying. I knew how to write legal documents. I knew how to present arguments in court, but I had no idea who I was. So this led me on a journey. Considering that I still had concussion symptoms, I decided to take some time off to do some soul searching. And that summer, I had a law friend reach out and say, hey, we're looking for a legal assistant. I know it's not a lawyer job, but it would get your foot in the door. Are you interested? At the time, I wasn't doing too much, so I decided to say yes. I went in, I got the job, and on my first day of being back in an office, my symptoms came right back. I had huge headaches. I was sensitive to the light. Sometimes I still have today on occasion. And for the first time in my life, I decided to listen to my body. I knew right then and there that it was not the environment for me. And that I had to listen this time around. I had so far dismissed the signals my body was giving me in order to please others and to perform. And so, within a couple days, I gave my 2-week notice. I was literally there 3 or 4 days and I gave my 2 weeks and I'm like, I'm out. And that was the last time I worked a formal job, so to speak. And then on, I met incredible mentors that helped me on my journey. They helped me to shed the conditioning that I was still holding in my vessel. And they helped me to just expand energetically and consciously and to remember who I am as a soul first and foremost. And it's understanding that the past 4 years have been very fucking difficult. We can think that, oh, you left the system, that things must be better. But no, they haven't always been. Because the transformational process itself has been brutal. And as we talk about Pluto's transit in Capricorn, it has felt deeply personal for me. Because I have my sun in Capricorn. I also have Uranus, Neptune, and my North Node. All this in my 6th house of occupation, career, health, and routine. So this specific era of my life has been pure chaos for the most part. But it's chaos that has allowed this alchemical transformation to occur. It's this cauldron where all this shit, this conditioning, the trauma, the childhood wounds, the past life imprints, all this stuff has just been put in this cauldron, mixed up and distilled. Distill until you get the golden aspect, which is your soul essence. Cleared of all this debris, this noise. A noise that a lot of us have to endure because of societal conditioning, our upbringing, our family dynamics. And moving through this sound chaos to eventually reach a space of stillness and inner calm is where your power emerges as a soul. And though Pluto's transit in Capricorn has been very fucking difficult, it's gotten me to this place where I am today, where, for the most part, I'm able to remain grounded and centered in my own power, in my own authority. And it's an understanding that this is the gift of Pluto in Capricorn. This is the lesson that this planet was seeking to teach us while in Capricorn. And so, now that I've shared my journey with Pluto in Capricorn, I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about how we would have experienced these energies as a collective. So, as I said, those of us that have strong Capricorn placements, sun, moon, rising, stelliums, would have felt Pluto's grip the most. But it's an understanding that we all have Capricorn somewhere in our birth chart, so we all would have felt Pluto's grip somewhere in our lives. And I say grip because it was aspects and parts of ourselves that had to be taken and put into this alchemical cauldron to be transformed and distilled into something better. And it's understanding that while Pluto was in Capricorn, Pluto wasn't working alone. Because who rules Capricorn? We have Big Daddy Saturn. Okay? And I call it Big Daddy Saturn because we've gotten well acquainted over the past years. And again, it's an understanding that both these energetics were playing through the collective over the past 14 years. 14 to 16 years if you include the transits into Aquarius, which we'll be touching on further down the road. So we think about this transformational process that we've gone through as a collective over the past 16 years, this dance between Pluto and Saturn, and what are they trying to achieve when they blend their energies together. We have Pluto who rules Scorpio. We have this death, rebirth energy. We have transformation. We have things that are occult, hidden, not visible to the naked eye. And then we have Capricorn, ruled by Saturn. Father Time, karma, discipline, structures, governments, institutions. So what tends to happen when we blend these two energies together? On an external level, we witness the shadows of our institutions, of our governments, come to the forefront. And the rising of these shadows within these structures is for us as human beings to shift our level of consciousness around them and to shift our relationship. Because it's no longer a dormant relationship when you become aware. when you become conscious and you notice the patterns. And the patterns tie in to certain dynamics, and those dynamics are oppression, strictness, discipline, because this is Saturn's field house. So as we notice the shift of Pluto into Capricorn back in 2008, Pluto took on this energy of just strictness, this underlying energetic oppression. And I say energetic oppression because it's invisible. We're talking about Pluto here, and Pluto moves in the shadows. It moves in the subconscious part of our psyche. So we might not have been fully aware of this transit's impact up until now. And this is because we are bringing in more light. And we have Aquarius energy bringing in that light, that electricity, that Uranian movement that we very much need at this point in time. And we're going to circle back to Uranus in a little bit. So focusing in on Pluto and Capricorn, a lot of shadows and messed up things with our institutions was brought to the surface, was brought to light so that we could transmute them and shift and change them for the better. And this is in preparation of Pluto now being in Aquarius. Pluto in Aquarius is going to bring humanity at the forefront. It's going to bring global causes into our awareness. And we're going to see certain trends start to spike, and these trends are going to have to do with connection to others. But it's an understanding that Pluto in Capricorn was laying the foundation for that deep work to take place, because it is going to still be work over the next coming decades, in particular for fixed signs, but we're going to come back to that. And so Pluto in Capricorn was laying the foundation, and I say laying the foundation because our current foundations sucked. They weren't built in integrity, they weren't built in honesty, and a lot of them were built on corruption. So that's why we started to see a lot of government institutions and structures start to collapse and be exposed. And this is so they can be turned to dust and ash and reforged. Reforged in a manner where they're more authentic, they were more transparent and honest with us. But it's understanding that while this transformation occurred within our structures, our institutions, the same thing was happening on a micro level within each and every one of us. We were being encouraged to revisit our internal structures and dismantle the ones that were oppressive to us. And this is more my area of expertise, being the internal workings of the soul, the oppressive mechanisms that a lot of us have held onto are conditioning, our trauma, our past life imprints, childhood wounds. And so it's understanding that some of this gunk solidified into structures as we moved into adulthood. And it's these specific structures that kept us stuck, that suffocated us, and that oppressed us. And this was all part of Saturn's teachings for us to learn discipline, responsibility through this invisible oppression along with Pluto. And through this, we were called to distill and create our own sense of inner authority through this energy. And Saturn really invited us to look at these structures and really investigate with Pluto's keen lens what is empowering you and what is disempowering you. So both Saturn and Pluto worked together to create this sense of inner mastery, where the structures that don't serve us are dismantled and destroyed, and the structures that do serve us are reinforced, are maintained. And this is the transit that we have been moving through and are closing out today as a collective. Both Pluto and Saturn joined forces to help us shed our inner limitations, our inner blocks, and to really face who we are so that we can step up and be our own authority, be our own inner leader, and not let other people boss us around or influence us or make life decisions for us. And as I touched on in the beginning of this live, the past 16 years for me personally have been a culmination of this energy. When I was 15, 16, I remember taking to heart what others said I should be doing with my life and applying it. Whereas now I wouldn't fucking dream of doing that shit. Because I'm my own authority now. I've distilled my own level of power and inner authority to the point where I don't let anybody else energetically influence me anymore. With the personal help of both Pluto and Saturn, I've been able to clear out a lot of the gunk. Doesn't mean it's all cleared. There's still some patterns there. But my vision is a lot clearer. And this is thanks to both of these planetary giants, even though they have put me through fucking hell on occasion. But I wouldn't be where I am today without them. And as we close out Pluto's transit in Capricorn today, it's an invitation for you to look back on your life over the past 16 years. What have you personally been grappling with, and what area of your life have you seen the biggest transformation occur? Because this is going to be the golden wisdom that both Pluto and Saturn are conveying and gifting us. Now, enter Aquarius. So Pluto entered Aquarius for the very first time last year. So we got a little glimpse of what the future would hold for us as Pluto makes its way into Aquarius permanently. We also got another glimpse early this year. And these glimpses were to set the stage for what is to come for the collective. So as we just discussed, Pluto and Saturn took the time to break down structures, both internally and externally, that were not serving us and that were causing internal and external oppression. And again, based on the soul work that we've been doing. And if we've been able to integrate and embody these lessons, we've been able to achieve a level of inner authority where we're not fuckable with anymore. And now as we progress into Pluto being in Aquarius, we're going to be called to stand in this authority even more and to be seen for it. Because here is the big shift that is happening. Pluto was in Capricorn, which is an earth sign. Earth signs have a feminine polarity, which means that a lot of the finer underworkings of Pluto and Capricorn happened subconsciously. They happened behind closed doors. They might not have always happened on the public sphere or scene. And now we're shifting gears with Pluto moving into Aquarius. Aquarius is an air sign. It has a masculine polarity. We are going to be seeing all the work we've put in over the past 16 years be displayed, be made visible and seen. And we're going to have the power, the foundation, and the inner integrity and authority to allow ourselves to be seen and to shine. And it's understanding that cardinal signs have been through this transformation the hardest over the past 16 years. And now Pluto moves into Aquarius, which is a fixed sign. So now over the next 20 years, Pluto's gaze is on fixed signs. And I know it's easy for some of us to start panicking, especially if we have cardinal placements and fixed sign placements. But it's understanding that the transformation that will be occurring over the next 20 years will not be as severe as the past 16 years we just underwent. And this is because Pluto is in an air sign. even though we're still going to be called to transform, to alchemize and transmute all that no longer serves, there's a lightness being brought to the surface because we're now in the element of air. And it's understanding that Pluto and Capricorn had to do with physicality, physical structures, whereas now we're moving into the mind, the mental space, our thought patterns, our beliefs, our ideas. And this is where we're going to witness transformation the most. And Aquarius is the humanist among the zodiac. Aquarius cares passionately about humanity, even though they can be very detached because they are an air sign. So it's understanding that what's really going to take center stage over the upcoming decades is humanitarianism, global causes. And it's also allowing ourselves to shine and let our unique self be seen, our weird self, our authentic self. And as I talk about this, the visual I'm getting is a card from my Moonology deck. And I believe it's either the new moon in Aquarius or full moon in Aquarius. And it says, show the world the real you. And that is what we're going to be experiencing as a collective over the upcoming decades, is that radical shift where people that have been maybe deep in hiding over the past 16 years are going to be taking center stage and really shining. And this has to do a lot with my fixed signs also taking the spotlight, being seen, leading. So we're going to see a drastic shift over the next 20 years. And it's a shift that's going to raise consciousness. We're going to see a lot of more souls find their soul tribes, find their soul families, and co-create together. So we're going to see different new trends hitting the market, hitting the collective, and these are trends that are going to help facilitate connection because they're going to be rooted in our shared humanity. Now, this is the light side of this transit that's going to be coming through for the collective. In terms of shadows, we're definitely still going to see some abuse of power. And it's in an understanding that we're each going to have to be mindful and practice discernment. There's still going to be groups that preach that they are for some greater cause than themselves, yet be some form of cult. And this is Pluto sharpening our gaze once again to really discern and observe who is for us and who isn't for us. Can we really sharpen our energetic perception of others and really tune in to our own frequency and resonance to the point where we know who is for us and who is not for us? Those that are for us are going to feel like home. We're going to be able to really see ourselves in those people. And there's going to be a natural gravitational pull towards those people. Whereas when it comes to souls not meant for us, there's going to be some resistance, or there might even be the energy conflicting and just exploding and pushing itself away. And the energy exploding and pushing itself away is Uranus energy, because we think of electricity. Electricity moves. We look at lightning in the sky. It just moves through the clouds until it hits something. And this is the type of energy we're going to be seeing through the collective as Pluto is now in Aquarius. We're going to be seeing and witnessing these lightning bolt moments. And your soul tribe is going to mimic and mirror back that lightning bolt energy. You're just going to feel a rush and excitement when you find your people. Versus when they're not your people, there's going to be friction. It's going to be static, and there might even be conflict. And it's interesting because now this brings me to Uranus being in Taurus. Thank you, sister. I appreciate you, and I love your timing on joining this live. So we're now bringing in Uranus in Taurus. So Uranus rules Aquarius. So again, that fast-paced energy, that electricity, that awakening, because we do call Uranus the Great Awakener. But Uranus is in Taurus, and to be honest, these two energies don't really mesh that well. We have Uranus, we think of that lightning bolt. It moves very quickly. In a flash, it's gone. And then we have Taurus, which is an earth sign. It moves very slowly. It can be stubborn, prefers stability and comfort. So these two energies naturally kind of clash. And as I was reflecting on the two of them earlier today, the visual I got is two pathways. We have that fire, that electricity, that light, that air, and then we have that earth, that water, that slowness. And so again, we're kind of seeing that dynamic between the masculine and feminine play out in the collective, and it's going to take on a more mental battle over the upcoming years. And I say mental because we have been seeing and experiencing that polarity and that divide between the masculine and the feminine, and it's been physical. Whereas now we're still going to see that divide a little bit, but it's going to take on a mental approach. So I wouldn't be surprised if we kind of see that conflict between different points of view, different perspectives. I'm already witnessing it in certain spiritual groups, and I'm like, what the fuck? Anyways, we're going to be seeing that on a bigger scale, and I wouldn't be surprised if people become more public with this mental divide between the masculine and the feminine. And it's an understanding that the souls that are preaching this divide, their souls are seeking a specific experience. And for those of us that are doing the inner work and are integrating both, are embodying both, we are going to be called to simply bear witness, to not really engage in this divisive energy, because that's not our role. Our role is to hold the space when we feel called to, or to disengage and focus on integration and embodiment and oneness in whatever shape or form that means to us. It's not about engaging in this divisive form of dialogue anymore. Some of us might have been called in the past to try and alter that pathway for those groups or those souls, but our role is shifting. It's changing, it's evolving, because we're evolving. We've transcended and transmuted so much over the past 16 years that we're now ready to be those formal space holders, to be those guides, to be those teachers. But it's understanding that with holding that role comes grace, comes compassion, and discernment. It's being able to discern who is worthy of entering our sacred space and receiving our teachings, because not everybody is there yet. And we need to understand and be able to perceive that. And again, that perception, that discernment comes from Pluto's energy. We've been turning Pluto's transformative gaze towards ourselves for the past 16 years, and now we need to turn that gaze outwards towards the collective and the rest of humanity. Knowing when to speak and when to remain silent. When to hold space and when to retract our own energy. And it's an understanding that a lot of us are going to emerge over the next 2 decades as these temple holders. In ancient civilizations, there were actual physical temples, and there were actual priests and priestesses that tended to these sacred sites. But a lot of these sacred sites have been desecrated, and the energy transformed and became metaphorical, invisible. So we no longer really have that many physical temples that we have access to, though some still exist. But it's understanding that the frequency of temple has become transparent. It has become energetic. So there's no longer necessarily a physical space, but there is an energetic space. And that energetic space is the souls that have been doing the work over the past 16 years. They now carry and embody the frequency of temple, of sacredness. And it's this energy that's going to be leading over the next coming decades. It's this temple energy. It's this sacredness. It's this connection to the earth, to humanity and nature as one. And anything not in alignment with that frequency is going to be distorted and broken down by Pluto. Because Pluto is not going to be fucking around anymore. Anything not in alignment and moving the collective upwards towards its ascension path and journey is going to fall away. And this is because we have Pluto and now Uranus working together. So even though Uranus is in Taurus and he doesn't really like being there, he's still going to be working conjunctly with Pluto because Pluto is in Aquarius and Uranus rules Aquarius. But Saturn wants to come through one last time to be like, hey, I'm also there. So yes, Saturn does co-rule Aquarius. So we still have that backdrop of Saturnian energy that's going to be moving through the collective over the next coming years. But it's going to be subtle. It's going to be that periodical check-in from Saturn, making sure that our structures are still intact and that we're still operating from that place of authority and we're not allowing external energies to distort our own. So Saturn is going to ask that we remain in alignment with our own discipline, own self-responsibility, and that we don't distort to save others. Because that's another big theme that's going to be moving through the collective for the next 10 to 20 years is this savior archetype. Pisces is coming through the shadows and be like, hey, I have something to do with that. So we're going to have to really be mindful for those of us that hold the temple energy to make sure that we don't fall into saviorship and wanting to save other souls from the work they need to do. And sometimes that saviorship can look like preventing other souls from becoming self-responsible. So for the souls that haven't yet integrated Saturn's lessons, they're going to be learning them over the next 10 to 20 years. But for those of us that have learned them, we need to make sure we're not preventing that learning by saving them. It's understanding as these space holders, we are there to bear witness. We are there to guide when called to. We are not there to save. We are not there to do the work for them. And it's understanding this dynamic because Saturn's at the forefront right now. There needs to be balance between your own responsibility and the other person's responsibility. And that's when that relationship has reached its golden state, when both individuals are self-responsible. The distortions happen when we have somebody that is self-responsible and the other person is not self-responsible. So the self-responsible person can want to overtake and over-dominate the person, being like, well, I'm just going to help them this one time. Well, I'm just going to do this for them. And it's understanding we need to step back. Even though that can be difficult, we need to step back, take our energy back, and redirect it elsewhere. Yes, sister, I would love to hear the downloads you've been receiving about the savior archetype since being in Peru. We will definitely have to exchange at some point because I feel that a lot of juicy stuff has been coming up for you, and stuff has been coming up for me too. So I'll have to catch up at some point. But yes, so the savior archetype comes with distorted Saturn energy. It comes with a lack of trust in the other person being able to self-actualize and get a grip and become self-disciplined. So again, we can want to just dive in and save. And the imagery I'm getting right now is of somebody drowning and us rushing in to save them when all they need to do is stand up. To realize that they're actually just in a puddle and they're not actually drowning. So a different dynamic that's also going to be playing out in the collective over the next 10 to 20 years is empowerment. But it's a different form of empowerment than we've witnessed while Pluto was in Capricorn. While Pluto was in Capricorn, the empowerment was physical. It had to do with our bodies for a lot of us. This is why we saw a lot of trends having to do with body healing. Capricorn is an earth sign. The physical vessel was the focus. So now we're going to be shifting more into mental, energetic healing over the upcoming transit. And this shift is because we've done enough integration and embodiment, and we need to keep that energy flowing. It's not because we've mastered it that, okay, well, we're not doing integration or embody practices anymore. No, they've become ingrained. Those practices are there, and we're now ready to expand into something else. Maybe at the end, if you want to stick around till then. Because I think I'm pretty much wrapping up. I mean, I was maybe going to draw cards, but I feel that the discussion around Pluto and Capricorn and now shifting into Pluto into Aquarius has been sufficient that I will probably do a reading at some point, diving in, but today was just mainly talking about the energies at the forefront. I want to see if anything else wants to come through. The final message that wants to come through is we need to allow ourselves a lot of grace as we close out this chapter. Because as I said when I started this live, it has been brutal for me personally. And if you're not feeling your best, even though this is a huge shift, give yourself the time and the compassion. Be gentle and go slowly. Because here's the thing, even though we have those two energetic pathways, we have the masculine and the feminine still intertwining. They are intertwining. So even though at periods they are apart, they do come back and crisscross and crisscross. So there are those meeting points. And it's understanding, and it's funny because as I mimic this, I think of snakes, but then I also think of DNA, the helix. So we're getting DNA activations that are going to be very prevalent now that Pluto is in Aquarius. Yes, holding space for others too. But yeah, so we're already seeing that crisscross. And that crisscross point is points of integration, embodiment, of pure balance between both the masculine and the feminine. And it's understanding that we're not always in pure balance, and that's okay, but we need to make sure that we are having those moments of pure balance, and we're not constantly just masculine or feminine, but that both are constantly energetically connected and moving seamlessly. And this is where we can tap into shape-shifting depending on the environment in which we find ourselves. And shape-shifting is something that happens consciously with awareness when we're first starting out. We consciously notice when we become more masculine, and we consciously notice when we become more feminine, and when we need one over the other. And it's an understanding that we're going to be integrating this awareness even more over the upcoming years, and those that are still struggling with this are going to be made more visible. more public, because we are going to be entering into a more masculine domain with Pluto being in Aquarius. Again, we're going to see the battle of the minds playing out, and we're going to have to just hold space for it all and remain the embodiment of the mastery we've achieved so far. So that is the transmission that wanted to come through for today, as we say goodbye to Pluto in Capricorn for the final time in our life and begin a new era where we have Pluto in Aquarius. That energy of the Great Awakener, that energy of the Master Alchemist. And we're going to see where this takes us over the next 10 to 20 years. So thank you so much for joining me today. It's been an absolute pleasure. I'm sending you all so much love. Acaisha, do you want to try and join now?
Hi, beautiful.
Hi. Oh my God. It's so nice to see you.
Likewise. Yeah, I was actually listening to some Matt Kahn and I finished that video and then I saw you were live and I started tuning in, and there was definitely some crossovers between like what you were channeling and what Matt Kahn and his partner Joy were speaking to. But yeah, I just feel so much resonance and like also feeling like this collective healing and shift with like this savior mentality. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be a big one because, as I said, for the most part, like what I'm sensing when it comes to the savior archetype, like a lot of it has been happening behind closed doors, whereas Pluto also reveals, right? So we're going to be seeing a lot of that savior archetype being revealed over the next coming years. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
Totally. And so I think you're gonna like really resonate with this kind of download and understanding that's kind of come through since I've been in Peru, in the Sacred Valley, and it's been around this like there's a lot of civilizations or peoples of the world that have been conquered by a more advanced society, you know, that maybe has like more technology, more cleanliness, more efficiency, like all of these things. And since being here, I've kind of had this like this seeing like through eyes of compassion, like, and just understanding of like what's happened and like how we can learn from what's happened to like recreate our world. And what I've kind of noticed is like there's good intentions, you know, like I'm in a third world country for the first time in my life, and I can see why like maybe someone coming from a more advanced technological, you know, from the outside world, we're more advanced, to be like, oh, we have all of these amazing inventions and ways of doing things and ways of living that like are really valuable, and so like let's share them with these people. But what's happened is there's been a lot of like conquer and like repression of like what the technology that's been alive in these civilizations and these peoples that's like living on the inside, that's not seen in like these fancy houses and these fancy cars and, you know, even like these fancy clothes. But there's a different kind of wealth that I feel like the history of, I don't know, like white people have like seen as like wealth. And as I just started like understanding this and seeing it, it's like, oh, like what would the world have looked like if we would have been like, hey, we come from wherever we come from, and we have like these inventions and like efficient ways of like working, and like, would you be interested in learning, like creating more of an invitation rather than like this like forcing oneself on someone because the way I live is better, and so we need to fix it and we need to save them, you know? And so it's like this conquer energy, but like what would have it looked like if like, you know, if our ancestors would have approached it a little differently and like weren't working with this savior archetype, which is so present in like, you know, Christianity, which I feel like is really tied into maybe our ancestors. And when I say our ancestors, I feel like we have ancestors from everywhere, but you know, maybe the white conquerors. But anyways, and then I can also like see this, like as I'm seeing it like here, I can see like how it's also alive in spiritual communities and how it has been alive in me too, where it's like, oh, like I'm living this way, I've healed these things in myself, and so it's like I need to help and save these people. When it's like, oh, like what would it actually look like if it's like, hey, this is like what I'm doing, what's working for me, and like just creating like gentle invitation, like spaces of invitation rather than like this masculine, like I need to like lead and like force myself into these spaces. Yeah, that's it's kind of the gist of what's been happening inside this heart.
Well, I love it, Acacia, and honestly, as always, we're constantly mirroring each other on our paths and life journeys because it's funny that you're talking about all this because my partner and I have had similar conversations about what we call third world countries and our developed countries, and he's from Peru. So we were
Mm.
talking about the different ways society is run between here in Canada versus his country in Peru. And we also were in Mexico at the beginning of this year. And I kind of had the thought, I'm like, what if we had it all backwards? What if it's actually these third world countries that actually know what's up and we're the ones that have just gone off the rails? Because if you think about it, like I know for me personally, what's been coming up is the lack of genuine nourishing foods here in Canada and
Mm.
how they're just distorting everything versus while I was in Mexico, everything was fresh right away and it was affordable. So it's just got my mind thinking of how like this whole setup as a simulation, you know, and I'm like, what if it's actually designed for us to just kind of realize how these countries that seem to be at opposite ends of the spectrums are just mirroring each other in different ways, and that we're both meant to integrate all of it. Take the good parts of the developed countries, but then also honor the parts that are sustainable and nourishing from the third world countries. What kind of world would it look like? And I find that ties into what you were saying about it being an invitation as opposed to, well, I'm here to just say I'm better and here's why. And it's got me thinking of what kind of world we would be living in if it was more collaborative in nature. If we came to the table being like, hey, I do this well, it works for me. I'd like to share and offer it to you. What would you like to share and offer to me? And tying back to our ancestors, the need to just conquer and overtake, again, it's really synchronistic because yesterday I was watching a video about the goddess and how the origin point was goddess worship till these civilizations, these groups came and kind of washed her away to implement gods and eventually a god. And how we kind of lost that feminine edge. And I feel that it's very much the same for these third world countries too. They still remained very connected to Gaia, to nature, whereas us in our developed countries, we've lost touch with that. And so we seem to think we're better, more advanced because of our technology, yet we've lost connection with our roots, our foundation. So as I talk about this, I get the image of a tree. In the developed countries, we're like the branch, you know, that go up into the sky, yet these third world countries are the roots, are the foundation, and we've just kind of been severed at the middle of the trunk. So we've got these two weird looking trees. We got the one mirroring the roots in the bottom and then the branches up at the top, but they're not connected. And I think that that's again what we're going to be called to, just reconnect that tree and be like, hey, both can coexist.
Totally, totally, like unifying the worlds. And I feel like, so I love our minds and the imagery that comes to them, because I had a similar one, but it was like this, the birds leaving the nest. And so it's like the evolution of mankind like left the roots of like these indigenous ways of being in connection with like the technology of Mother Earth. And like the young birds fly away and like find all these new technologies, and we want to bring them home to our tribe and like make it better, but it's like we've also forgotten something. And so it's like sharing, and I feel like a big thing that's going to be happening inside of our like beings is this like our world, like instead of like this my energy, like this our energy. And I feel like, yeah, it all happens in here. And yeah, I'm grateful for these things. And it's also interesting, one thing I'll share like about, because you were just sharing like the richness of food here. And I feel like people are more connected to their food and growing it here. But as someone who's visiting as an outsider, it's been interesting how there's been this subtle fear of like getting sick from food, just from like different cleansiness practices, and also just from like a different gut biome from like growing up and being in Canada for 32 years and then coming to a new place where there's like an entirely new like ecosystem. And so it's also like today with Ben, I was just like, man, like it's kind of weird like having this subtle like fear of like not trusting food, or like, of like, can I trust it? And so it's just, there's a lot of initiations happening for me being here, and just like a lot of the uncomfortableness of what I'm feeling is like subtle, like nothing is like, like make me want to hide in our place or anything, but like it's like there's a lot of seeing that's happening in my being that's really good for us.
Yeah, well, I love that you brought up fear, because I feel with the fact that like we've lived in this disconnection for so long, I think it's perfectly natural that fear and discomfort come up when we're kind of starting to reclaim that lost part of ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it is going to feel uncomfortable. We've been separated for God knows how long. So I think we need to acknowledge that it's okay to feel fear, to feel that discomfort, and that's how we start the conversation, and that's how we start healing this aspect of ourselves. It's saying, hey, I know you're a part of me, but you've been not a part of me for so long. I feel uncomfortable. I feel fearful. And to just approach it all from a place of just compassion and grace as we move through reconnecting with these energies.
Totally. And just like this celebration of like, wow, I'm feeling this. And I'm actually open enough to be real with myself and like see it and like talk with it. Like that just feels like, yeah, really, that feels really profound. And it's also shown me, Leah, it's also shown me of like, because it's a very common story you hear about people traveling from like Canada or the United States, to like, Central and South America, of like, oh, like watch out for the food, you're gonna get sick. It's like a very common story, and I feel like a lot of what a belief that's tied into that is like that these countries are not as clean. And in a third world country, they don't have as much infrastructure set up. They still have quite a bit. It's like, wow, we're in the Indian mountains and I have Wi-Fi. It's pretty amazing. Um, but you know, like maybe I've just noticed there's more garbage around and stuff like this, but it's like I'm noticing that there's this belief feeding into these projections that like the food is not safe here, is like this belief that like nature is dirty. And I tapped into that today, and I've just really been like, you know, like sitting with it and working with it. And I'm like, oh my, like this is juicy. And yeah, it's just interesting. I feel like I didn't realize I'd be traveling for these things. It's like I'm traveling for like these weird, uncomfortable things that are happening in me, but it's like the gold, and it's like, okay, this is it's kind of, yeah, it's a journey.
Yeah. Well, honestly, Acaisha, like I love what you've been sharing so far because again, like I feel like it ties in perfectly into like that image I was getting of like the branches and the roots. And like when we travel to third world countries, we're exploring those roots that we've been disconnected from. And roots are in the ground, they're in darkness, right? So it makes sense that there's fear there, you know, and they're just like, well, I need to deal with this. What do I do if this happens and stuff like that? And for me, and this is just like the intuitive hit I got right now, we're so used to things being sterile and clean here, and it's to the point where there's not a lot of activations that happen. Whereas when we go to these third world countries where things aren't as sterile, it leaves room for these shamanic initiations to come through. And sometimes it can be in the form of food poisoning, should that occur. You know, and it's just these subtleties, these subtle energetic shifts that our body might be seeking when we go to these places. We tend to be like, oh, well, I don't want food poisoning. Oh, I don't want that. But what if it's actually an initiation that your soul is seeking because it's looking to call back its roots?
Totally, totally. I love that analogy of like the darkness of what's beneath the earth. I love you so much, Leah. I gotta go. My girl's up and she's
Okay,
crying, and
sounds good. I love you. And yeah, we'll have to do this again.
I love you so much. I'm so happy we've had these moments together.
Me too. Okay. Mwah.
Ciao.
Okay. Bye, beautiful. What a powerful exchange. Reclaiming our roots is a mysterious journey that we undertake, and it invites us to explore the underworld. Now, I didn't anticipate staying on here, but I have a few closing remarks I wanted to share before I close up this live. And as Acaisha and I so bravely spoke about reclaiming our roots, fear and discomfort are natural responses, and we need to not shy away from those emotions. We can think, and this is often prevalent in the spiritual communities, that we need to put on this persona that has it all figured out, everything's beautiful, it's bright, it's airy, but that's not true. There is darkness, there are shadows, and there are fears, and we need to allow ourselves the space to explore them and to not shame or guilt ourselves for experiencing fears. We need to go back to our roots, and part of those roots is our inner child. We wouldn't shame or guilt a child for being afraid of something, and we shouldn't shame or guilt ourselves either. So, as we close out this beautiful, enlightening conversation surrounding Pluto shifting into Aquarius, I leave you with the final message of explore your fears and where you are uncomfortable, because they hold the keys to your greatest gifts and power. I'm sending you all so much love.